A down-on-his-luck janitor, ridiculed for wasting his life cleaning up after others, suddenly inherits a crumbling church. Everyone laughed, until he discovered the secret buried beneath its floors. What he found would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The janitor no one noticed. The alarm buzzed at 5 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 12 years. Marlon Briggs groaned, rolling onto side to silence the old clock radio before it could wake the neighbors. His tiny apartment above Lou's Diner wasn't much, just a single room with a hot plate and a shower that ran cold half the time. But it was cheap, and that was all that mattered. He dressed in the dark, pulling on his faded blue work shirt with a peeling name tag that read Marlon, Custodial Staff. The fabric was thin from years of washing, the cuffs frayed. He laced up his worn-out sneakers, the soles nearly smooth from miles of pacing school hallways. Outside, the streets of Buffalo were still asleep. The late October air bit his skin as he trudged toward McKinley High, his breath fogging in the pre-dawn chill. He liked this time of day, the quiet, the emptiness. Nobody around to ignore him. The school's back entrance was always unlocked for him. He flicked on the lights, the fluorescence buzzing to life over the scuffed linoleum floors. His mop bucket waited in the supply closet, right where he'd left it. For the next 2 hours, he worked in silence, scrubbing away the previous day's mess. Dried gum under desks, soda stains in the cafeteria, the occasional crude drawing sharpened onto a locker. The kids called him the ghost, because he moved through the halls without a sound, unnoticed. Even the teachers barely looked up when he passed. At 7:30 a.m., the first students trickled in. A group of seniors lounged against the lockers, laughing too loud, their voices bouncing off the tiled walls. "Yo, Ghost, you missed a spot," one of them called, kicking a crumpled chip bag toward Marlon's feet. He didn't react, just bent down, picked it up, and dropped in the trash. "Dude's like a robot," another kid muttered. Marlon kept walking. He'd learned long ago that reacting only made it worse. By lunchtime, he was in the faculty lounge, wiping down the coffee machine. The teachers chatted around him like he wasn't even there. "Did you hear about the budget cuts? They're axing the arts program." "Ugh, of course." Meanwhile, the football team gets new uniforms every year. Marlon tuned them out, focusing on the streaks left behind on the counter. Then the school secretary, Mrs. Ruiz, poked her head in. "Marlon, there's a guy at the front desk asking for you." That got his attention. Nobody ever asked for him. The man in the suit looked out of place in the dingy school lobby. He held a thick envelope. "Marlon Briggs?" "Yeah. I'm Robert Vassar, from Vassar and Low Attorneys. I've been trying to reach you." He held out the envelope. "You've been named the sole beneficiary in your uncle's will." Marlon blinked. "My uncle, Father Joseph Briggs. He passed last month." Marlon hadn't seen his uncle in over 20 years. The man had been a priest, quiet and distant, the kind of relative you only heard about at funerals. "What's in the will?" Vassar hesitated. "It's complicated. He left you a property. A church, actually." Marlon almost laughed. "A church? Street Ignatius, out on Mill Road. It's been abandoned for years." Marlon had heard of it. The old stone building on the edge of town, half collapsed, covered in ivy. Kids dared each other go inside, said it was haunted. "Why me?" Vassar shrugged. "You were his only living relative." "But, Marlon," he lowered his voice, "the place is in bad shape, structurally unsound. You might be better off selling the land." Marlon took the envelope, his fingers brushing against the thick paper inside. Deeds, legal jargon, a faded key. "Thanks," he muttered. Vassar gave him a business card. "Call if you have questions. And, good luck." As the lawyer walked away, Marlon stared down at the envelope. A church. What the hell was he supposed to do with a church? That night, instead of heading straight home, he drove out to Mill Road. The streetlights grew farther apart as he left the city, until the only light came from his high beams cutting through the dark. And then there it was. St. Ignatius loomed against the night sky, its steeple crooked, its stained glass windows shattered. The iron gate hung off its hinges, squealing in the wind. Marlin parked and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his shoes. The air smelled like damp stone and old wood. He pulled out the key and walked toward the massive double doors. They were warped with age. The lock was rusted, but after some wiggling, it gave way with a groan. The inside was worse than he'd imagined. Pews overturned, the floor littered with broken plaster. The ceiling had caved in near the altar, moonlight streaming through the holes. But then, something caught his eye, a glint of metal beneath the rubble. Marlin crouched, brushing aside chunks of plaster. There, half buried, was a rusted iron ring, bolted to floor, a trapdoor. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the ring and pulled. It didn't budge. He yanked harder, muscles straining, until, creak, the door gave way, revealing a set of narrow stone steps leading down into darkness. Marlin swallowed. Then he reached for his phone, turned on the flashlight, and took the first step down. The town's mockery. The air in the hidden crypt was thick with the scent of damp earth and old stone. Marlin's phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness as he descended the narrow steps, each footfall echoing off the walls. The temperature dropped with every step, his breath turning to mist in the chilled air. At the bottom, the beam of light revealed a small, vaulted chamber, no larger than a prison cell, with walls lined in crumbling brick. A single wooden crate sat in the center, coated in decades of dust. Marlin's pulse hammered in his ears. He hesitated, then brushed the grime from the lid. The wood was dry, splintering under his touch. With a slow exhale, he pried it open. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, were stacks of faded certificates, their edges brittle with age. He lifted one carefully, squinting at the ornate script. United States Government Bearer Bond. The denomination made his stomach drop. $10,000. And beneath it, another and another. His hands shook as he counted. Dozens, maybe hundreds. All identical. A noise from above made him freeze. A creak, like weight on old floorboards. Someone was in the church. Marlin's blood turned to ice. He shoved the bond back into the crate, snapping the lid shut just as a voice rang out from above. Hello. Male. Raspy. Not friendly. Marlin killed the flashlight, plunging himself into total darkness. His heart pounded so hard he was sure it could be heard. Footsteps moved across the sanctuary above, slow and deliberate. Then silence. Had they left? Then, thud, something heavy hit the trapdoor. Marlin barely stifled a gasp as dust rained down from the impact. Another thud, then another. They were trying to break in. He scrambled back, pressing himself against the far wall as the door trembled under the assault. The ancient hinges groaned in protest. Then, abruptly, the noise stopped. A long pause. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. Marlin didn't move for a full minute, straining to hear any sign of the intruder. Only when the silence stretched unbearably did he dare to flick the flashlight back on. The crate was still there, the bonds untouched. But now he knew one thing for certain. Someone else wanted what was down here. Dawn was breaking by the time Marlin made it back to his apartment, the bonds carefully hidden in a duffel bag beneath his bed. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every creak of the old building had him jerking upright, ears straining. At 7 a.m., he gave up on rest and headed to Lou's Diner, the only place in town where nobody asked questions. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, the smell of grease and coffee wrapping around him like an old blanket. He slid into his usual booth in the back, nodding at Lou behind the counter. The old man grunted in return, flipping a pancake without looking up. Marlin had just taken his first sip of bitter coffee when the door banged open. Vince Kowalski, the town mechanic, swaggered in with his usual entourage of layabouts. His grease-stained coveralls reeked of motor oil and stale beer. Well, Vince drawled, spotting Marlin. If it ain't the new landlord. Marlin kept his eyes on his coffee. Heard you got yourself a church, Vince continued, sliding into the booth across from him uninvited. What are you going to do, Briggs? Start preaching? Laughter erupted from his buddies. Marlin's grip tightened around his mug. Just fixing it up. Fixing it. Vince barked a laugh. Place is a death trap. Roofs cave in, floors are rotted. You'd have better luck burning it down for the insurance. Marlin said nothing. Hell, Vince leaned in. I'll give you $5,000 for the land right now. Save you the trouble. That got Marlin's attention. His eyes flicked up. Why? Vince shrugged, too casual. Prime location. Could put up a garage. Something in his tone set off alarms in Marlin's head. Too eager. Too quick. I'll think about it, he muttered. Vince's smirk faded. Don't think too long. He stood, knocking the table just hard enough to slosh coffee over Marlin's sleeve. Places like that, they got a way of burning down. The threat hung in the air as Vince and his crew sauntered out, the door slamming behind them. Lou appeared a second later, wiping his hands on his apron. You piss off Kowalski? Marlin watched through the window as Vince climbed into his tow truck. Guess so. Lou sighed. Guy's got connections, Marlin. Sheriff's his cousin. You didn't find nothing in that church, did you? Marlin's pulse jumped. Like what? Dunno. But folks been whispering about St. Ignatius for years. Old man Crouch used to say there was treasure buried there. Who's Crouch? Reverend Elias Crouch. Runs that megachurch over on Route 9. Used to be your uncle's rival back in the day. Lou lowered his voice. Word is, he's been trying to buy that land for decades. Marlin's mind raced. The bonds. The intruder. Now this. Thanks for the coffee, Lou. He tossed a few bills on the table and stood. Where you headed? Marlin glanced out the window again. Vince's tow truck was gone, but the unease in his gut remained. To get some answers. The crypt beneath. The drive to Route 9 was quiet. The kind of silence that pressed against Marlin's eardrums like a physical weight. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His knuckles pale under the dim morning light. The duffel bag on the passenger seat felt heavier than it was, its contents burning a hole in his thoughts. Reverend Elias Crouch's megachurch, New Dawn Sanctuary, loomed ahead. A sprawling complex of polished glass and gleaming steel, a far cry from the crumbling ruin of St. Ignatius. The parking lot was already half full despite the early hour. Luxury cars lined up in perfect rows. Marlin parked near the back, away from security cameras. He hesitated before grabbing the duffel bag. Bringing the bonds inside felt reckless, but leaving them in the car was worse. The lobby was cavernous, all marble floors and towering ceilings. A woman in a crisp blazer smiled from behind a reception desk. Welcome to New Dawn. Are you here for the 9 a.m. service? Marlin adjusted the strap of the duffel bag on his shoulder. I need to speak with Reverend Crouch. Her smile didn't waver. Do you have an appointment? Tell him it's about St. Ignatius. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Concern? Before she picked up the phone. A hushed conversation later. She gestured down a hallway. Third door on the right. The office door was solid oak, the nameplate gleaming. Reverend Elias Crouch, senior pastor. Marlin knocked. Come in. The voice was smooth, practiced. The kind of voice used to giving sermons. Crouch sat behind an immaculate desk, his silver hair perfectly combed, his suit tailored to within an inch of its life. He looked up from a stack of papers, his smile warm but not quite reaching his eyes. Mr. Briggs, I've been expecting you. Marlin didn't sit. You know who I am? Of course. Joseph's nephew. Crouch leaned back in his chair. I was sorry to hear of his passing. He was a complicated man. Complicated how? Crouch steepled his fingers. Stubborn. Secretive. He could have been a great leader, but he clung to the past. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. You look like you've had a long night. Marlin remained standing. Someone tried to break into the church last night. Ah. Crouch sighed. Vandals, no doubt. That's why I've been trying to acquire the property, to preserve it before it's lost entirely. Vince Kowalski offered to buy it this morning. A muscle twitched in Crouch's jaw. Vince is overzealous, but my offer stands. Name your price. Marlin studied him. The too perfect smile, the calculated calm. Why do you want it so bad? Crouch's expression darkened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into serenity. Sentimental value. Joseph and I were colleagues once. Lou said you were rivals. A pause. Then Crouch chuckled. Lou should stick to pancakes. He stood, rounding the desk. Let's be honest, Mr. Briggs. That building is a liability. The roof could collapse tomorrow. The wiring is a fire hazard. You'd be doing the community a service by selling. Marlin shifted the duffel bag. What if I found something in it? Crouch went very still. Like what? Bonds. A lot of them. Silence. Then Crouch laughed. A rich, booming sound that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. Oh, Joseph. Still playing games from beyond the grave. He shook his head. Those bonds are worthless, son. Collector's items at best. Marlin reached into the duffel and pulled one out. This says $10,000. Crouch's smile didn't slip, but his fingers curled slightly at his sides. Bearer bonds from that era were never properly canceled. They're artifacts, not currency. Then why did someone try to take them last night? The air in the room thickened. Crouch's voice dropped. All pretense of warmth gone. Listen carefully, Mr. Briggs. Those bonds were stolen from this church over 80 years ago. They belong to my congregation. Return them, and I'll make sure you're compensated. Marlin's pulse roared in his ears. Stolen from who? From the people who earned them. Crouch took a step closer. This doesn't have to be difficult. Walk away now, and I'll even throw in a donation to that school you clean. The condescension in his tone lit a fire in Marlin's gut. I think I'll hold on to them. Crouch's face hardened. A mistake. He pressed a button on his desk. Security will see you out. Two broad-shouldered men appeared in the doorway. Marlin shouldered the duffel bag. I know the way. As he walked back through the lobby, he could feel Crouch's eyes burning into his back. The library's historical archives were musty and dim, the air thick with the scent of old paper. Marlin sat at a microfilm reader, squinting at decades-old newspaper clippings. Buffalo Evening News, June 1936. The headline leapt off the screen. Local church fire destroys records. Below it, a grainy photo of St. Ignatius, not in ruins, but whole, vibrant. A crowd stood outside, their faces drawn with grief. The caption read, Congregation mourns loss of church savings and suspected arson. Marlin's breath caught. He scrolled further. Another article, smaller. Pastor denies theft allegations. The text was faded, but one line stood out. Reverend Elias Crouch Sr., father of current assistant pastor, insists the bonds were lost in the blaze. Marlin leaned back, his mind racing. Crouch's father. The bonds. The fire. It wasn't just about money. It was about covering tracks. He pulled out his phone and dialed the only person he could think of. Lou, I need a favor. A pause. Then, how fast can you find me a bonds expert? The shadow claimant. The rain started just as Marlin pulled up to Lou's diner again, fat droplets smearing the grime on his windshield. He killed the engine but didn't move, staring at the neon open sign flickering through the downpour. The bonds were still in the duffel bag on the passenger seat, heavier now with the weight of what they might mean. Lou had promised to call a guy, some retired finance professor from Buffalo State who knew about pre-war securities. But that would take time. And time, Marlin suspected, was running out. The diner door jingled as he stepped inside, shaking water from his jacket. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving only a few truckers nursing coffees at the counter. Lou glanced up from the grill, his eyebrows lifting when he saw Marlin's face. That bad, huh? Marlin slid into his usual booth. Crouch says the bonds were stolen from his church 80 years ago. Lou wiped his hands on his apron and dropped into the seat across from him. Bullshit. Your uncle was the straightest arrow I ever met. If he had those bonds, there's a reason. His father was accused of stealing them. Lou whistled low. Old man Crouch? Yeah, that tracks. Guy was crooked as a barrel of snakes. He leaned in. You talked to Lena yet? Who? Lena Rivera. Teaches history at the community college. Knows more about this town's skeletons than the cemetery does. Lou scribbled a number on a napkin. Tell her I sent you. Marlin pocketed the napkin just as his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Briggs? A woman's voice, sharp and no nonsense. This is Dr. Eleanor Price. Lou said you have some Depression-era bonds you like authenticated. Yeah. How soon can you look at them? I'm retired, not dead. Bring them to my house tonight. 7 p.m. She rattled off an address in the old money part of town. And Mr. Briggs? Don't tell anyone where you're going. The line went dead. Marlin stared at the phone. She always that friendly? Lou snorted. Ellie? She used to audit the mob in the 90s. Only person I know who made the Genovese family pay back taxes. The rain had turned to a cold drizzle by the time Marlin parked outside Dr. Price's brownstone. The house was older than the others on the block, its ivy-covered brick and wrought iron fence giving it the air of a fortress. A security camera tracked his approach. Before he could knock, the intercom crackled. Duffel bag. Left hand. Show me. Marlin held it up. The door unlocked with a heavy thunk. Dr. Price waited in the foyer, a wiry woman in her 70s with a steel-gray bob and glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She eyed him like a suspicious ledger. Kitchen. Now. Her kitchen was a historian's war room. Maps pinned to the walls, archival boxes stacked precariously on the table. A magnifying lamp stood ready beside a leather-bound ledger. Let's see them. Marlin unzipped the bag. Dr. Price donned white cotton gloves before touching the bonds, handling each like a sacred text. She held one up to the light. Watermarks intact. Serial numbers matched the 1934 series. Are they real? Oh, they're real. She flipped open a ledger, running a finger down a column of numbers. But here's the problem. These were reported destroyed in the 36 church fire. Marlin's stomach dropped. So they're worthless? Not even slightly. Dr. Price tapped the ledger. Bearer bonds don't expire. And since the Treasury never received cancellation paperwork. She trailed off, looking at him meaningfully. They're still valid. $90 million valid. She removed her glasses. Assuming you can prove they weren't stolen. Marlin exhaled sharply. Crouch said, Elias Crouch? Dr. Price's mouth twisted. His father burned that church down to cover the theft. The bonds were meant for the street Ignatius congregation, mostly immigrant families who'd pooled their life savings. A puzzle piece clicked into place. My uncle hid them. And now you've got every vulture in Buffalo circling. She handed him a photocopy from the ledger. This is the original purchase list. Compare the serial numbers. If they match, those bonds belong to the descendants. Marlin studied the faded names. Italian, Polish, Irish. Working-class families who trusted their money to the church. What happens if I try to cash them? Dr. Price's smile was grim. You'll have a target on your back the size of Lake Erie. The street was dark when Marlin stepped outside, the duffel bag now stuffed with photocopies, as well as bonds. He'd just reached his car when headlights flared to life across the street. A black SUV rolled forward, stopping directly in his path. The passenger window lowered. Sheriff Coulter leaned out, his badge glinting under the streetlight. Evening, Briggs. Marlin's grip tightened on the duffel. Sheriff, heard you've been poking around old history. Coulter's smile didn't reach his eyes. Dangerous hobby. Just cleaning out my uncle's place. Uh-huh. The sheriff nodded at the bag. Find anything interesting? The air hummed with tension. Rotting floorboards. A lot of dust. Coulter studied him a moment longer, then chuckled. Well, you let me know if that changes. He tapped the doorframe. Oh, and Briggs? Reverend Crouch asked me to remind you. He's got friends in high places. Might be smart to stay on his good side. The window rolled up. The SUV pulled away, leaving Marlin standing in the yellow pool of a streetlight, the weight of $90 million pressing against his shoulder, and the unmistakable sense that the clock was ticking. The Allies emerge. The cold seeped through Marlin's jacket as he stood in the empty parking lot of community college, the duffel bag heavy against his side. The campus was quiet this hour, Just a few students hurrying to late classes under the glow of sodium lights. Lena Rivera's office was in the history department, tucked away in a brick building with ivy crawling up its sides. Lou's words echoed in his mind. She knows more about this town's skeletons than the cemetery does. Marlin took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath fogging in the chilly hallway. The door to Office 307 was slightly ajar, light spilling out into the corridor. He knocked hesitantly. "Come in." The voice was warm but firm. Lena Rivera sat behind a desk buried under stacks of books and file folders. She was younger than he'd expected, late 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and sharp brown eyes that sized him up in an instant. A silver pendant hung around her neck, an old-fashioned key resting against her collarbone. "You're Lou's friend," she said, not a question. "Marlin Briggs. I know who you are." She closed the book in front of her and gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Let's see what you found." Marlin hesitated, then unzipped the duffel bag and pulled out one of the bonds, sliding across the desk. Lena didn't touch it. She just stared, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a pair of white gloves, slipping them on before carefully lifting the bond. "Where did you get this?" "Street Ignatius." There was a hidden crypt beneath the altar. She exhaled sharply, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper, like it was something sacred. "I've spent years trying to prove these existed." Marlin frowned. "You knew about them?" "Not for sure. Just rumors. Stories passed down." She set the bond down and reached for a battered leather-bound book on her shelf, flipping it open to a marked page. A faded newspaper clipping from 1936 was taped inside, the same one Dr. Price had shown him. "The fire at St. Ignatius wasn't an accident," Lena said. "It was arson. The Crouch family stole those bonds from a congregation, mostly immigrant families who had pooled their savings. When people started asking questions, they burned the church to cover it up." Marlin leaned forward. "My uncle, Father Joseph, he hid them? He must have." She tapped the clipping. "He was the only one who stood up to the Crouches back then. They pushed him out, made sure no one would listen to him. But he never gave up." A silence settled between them. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. "So what now?" Marlin asked, "If these bonds are still valid." "They are," Lena interrupted. "But cashing them? That's the problem. The Crouches have spent decades making sure no one could ever claim this money. Judges, politicians, even the damn sheriff, they all Elias favors." Marlin's jaw tightened. "So we just let them keep it?" "No," Lena's eyes flashed. "We find the descendants. The original families who owned these bonds. If we can prove they were stolen, we can fight." She pulled out a folder from her desk, spreading photos and documents across the surface. Faces stared back. Old black and white portraits of families in their Sunday best, standing in front of St. Ignatius. "I've been tracking them for years," she said. "Most moved away after the fire. Some stayed, but their kids don't even know the story." Marlin picked up one of the photos. A young couple holding a baby. The name scrawled on the back read, "The Kovacs, 1935. Are any of them still in Buffalo?" "A few." Lena pointed to another photo. Maria Gutierrez's granddaughter runs a bakery on the west side. The Donatos have a grandson who works at the shipyard. Marlin studied the faces, the weight of history pressing down on him. These weren't just names on paper. These were people who had been robbed. "We find them," he said. "All of them." Lena nodded, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "Then we take Crouch down." The bakery was closed by the time they arrived, but a light still glowed in the back. Lena knocked twice, then 3 times, a pattern. A moment later, the door cracked open, revealing a woman in her 50s with flour dusting her apron. Her eyes narrowed at Lena, then flicked to Marlin. "Lena? What's going on?" "Anna, we need to talk," Lena said. "About your grandmother." Anna's expression darkened. She stepped aside, letting them in. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and yeast, warm and comforting despite the tension in the air. Lena didn't waste time. She pulled out one of the bonds and set it on the counter. Anna froze. "Where did you get that?" "Street Ignatius." Marlin said. Your grandmother's name is on the list. She was one of the original owners. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for it. Abuela talked about this. She said they saved for years, that the church was supposed to hold it for them. Then the fire. Her voice cracked. They lost everything. Marlin exchanged a glance with Lena. We're going to make it right, Lena said, but we need your help. Anna wiped her hands on her apron, her jaw setting with determination. What do you need? The shipyard was quieter at night, the massive cranes looming like skeletons against the sky. Joe Donato was waiting for them near the docks, his work gloves shoved into the pocket of his coveralls. Lena, he said by way of greeting. Then, eyeing Marlin, you the guy who found the bonds? Marlin nodded. Joe let out a low whistle. Granddad always said they were out there. Never thought I'd see one. Lena handed him a photocopy of the ledger. His name's here. He owned 5 of them. Joe studied the paper, his callous fingers tracing the faded ink. 50 grand. That would have changed everything for them. He looked up, his gaze sharp. What's the plan? We find as many descendants as we can, Marlin said. Then we take Crouch to court. Joe snorted. Court? You met the judges in this town? They're all in Crouch's pocket. Not if we go public, Lena countered. If we have enough people, enough proof, we can force their hand. Joe considered this, then nodded slowly. I know a few more names. Cousins, old neighbors. They'll want in. Marlin felt the first flicker of hope. They weren't just fighting for money. They were fighting for justice. The street was empty when Marlin finally got back to his apartment, the adrenaline of the night still humming in his veins. He locked the door behind him, setting the duffel bag carefully on the table. Then he froze. The window was open, just a crack, but he'd left it closed. He crossed the room in 2 strides, yanking the curtain aside. Nothing, but on the sill, half hidden in the shadows, was a single blackened match. A message. Crouch knew, and he wasn't going to wait for them to make the next move. The fire. The smell of smoke hit Marlin before he even turned onto Mill Road. At first, he thought it was just a bonfire, some kids drinking in the woods, maybe. But then he saw the glow in the distance, an angry orange flicker against the night sky. His foot slammed the gas pedal before his brain fully processed what was happening. The church was burning. Flames licked up the sides of St. Ignatius, devouring the old wood frame, the stained glass windows exploding from the heat. The steeple groaned, tilting dangerously as embers spiraled into the sky. Marlin skidded to a stop, throwing open the truck door before the engine had even died. The heat hit him like a wall, forcing him back a step. No, 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 no. He yanked his shirt over his mouth and ran toward the side entrance, the one with the rusted hinges he'd pried open weeks ago. The metal scorched his palms as he shoved against it, but it didn't budge. Something heavy blocked it from the inside. A crash echoed from within as part of the roof caved in. Sparks showered the overgrown grass. Sirens wailed in the distance, too far away. Marlin stumbled back, coughing, his eyes stinging from the smoke. The bonds, the ledger, the proof, all of it was inside. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single image loaded. The wooden crate where he'd stored the bonds, now sitting on a polished desk. The corner of a gold-framed portrait visible in the edge of the photo, Reverend Crouch's office. A second message followed. Should have taken the deal. Marlin's hand shook, but not from the cold. They'd stolen the bonds, and now they were erasing the evidence. The fire trucks arrived 20 minutes too late. By then, the steeple had collapsed inward, taking most of the north wall with it. Marlin stood with a gathering crowd of onlookers, his arms crossed tight over his chest as the firefighters aimed their hoses at the wreckage. Sheriff Calter's patrol car rolled up, lights flashing. He took one look at Marlin and smirked. Guess you should have listened to Vince about that insurance. Marlin didn't rise to the bait. Arson investigation take long around here? Oh, we'll look into it. Calter adjusted his belt. But between you and me, old buildings like this, wiring goes bad all the time. Convenient. The sheriff leaned in close, his breath reeking of peppermint and tobacco. Here's some free advice, Briggs. Walk away. Only thing left in that church now is ashes. A firefighter called Coulter over, sparing Marlin from replying. He turned instead to where Lena stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale in the flickering light. She didn't speak until they were in his truck. Doors closed against prying ears. They took everything. Marlin showed her the photo. Lena's jaw tightened. We still have the ledger copies. The descendant list. Won't matter without the bonds. It will if we get them back. Marlin stared at her. You're talking about breaking into Crouch's office. I'm talking about justice. She pulled out her phone, pulling up a blueprint. New Dawn security system gets serviced every Thursday. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the alarms will be offline for 20 minutes. How do you know that? Because I've been planning this for years. Her smile was razor-thin. You in? The church groaned as another beam gave way, sending up a fresh plume of sparks. Marlin turned the key in the ignition. Tell me the plan. The diner was empty at 4 a.m. Lou poured coffee without asking, sliding the mugs across the counter as Lena spread blueprints between the salt and pepper shakers. Main office is here. Second floor, east wing. Single camera in the hall. But it's a dummy. She tapped a circled spot. Real security is the keypad on the door. For digits. Which you have. Marlin asked. Birth year of Crouch's father. 1901. Lou whistled. You've been inside before. Once. Lena's fingers tightened around her mug. Research trip. He's got display cases full of historical artifacts, all stolen from congregations like St. Ignatius. Marlin studied the layout. What about staff? Wedding rehearsal in the chapel at 10:15. Everyone will be tied up. It was a good plan. It was also felony burglary. Lou wiped down the counter, his voice low. You get caught, Crouch owns the sheriff. You'll disappear into the system before lunch. Marlin met Lena's gaze. We don't have a choice. The bonds were the only leverage they had. Without them, the descendants' claims were just stories. Without them, Crouch won. Again, Lena folded the blueprints. Meet me at the laundromat across the street at 9:30. Dress like maintenance. Marlin nodded. As she left, Lou caught his arm. Kid, you sure about this? Outside, the first hints of dawn tinged the sky pink over the smoldering remains of St. Ignatius. Marlin set down a 20. Never been surer. The maintenance uniform itched. Marlin adjusted the cap low over his eyes as he pushed the wheeled trash bin through New Dawn's spotless parking lot. Lena followed a few yards back, clipboard in hand, her hair tucked under a baseball cap. Right on schedule. The security truck pulled away at 9:58 a.m. Alarms are down, Lena murmured as they took the service elevator. 20 minutes starts now. The hall outside Crouch's office was deserted. The promise wedding rehearsal drawing all staff to the chapel. The keypad beeped softly as Lena entered 1901. The lock clicked. Inside, the office was all dark wood and stained glass, the air thick with the scent of lemon polish. And there, on the shelf behind the desk, the wooden crate. Marlin crossed the room in 3 strides, lifting the lid. Empty. They moved them, Lena hissed. Then the door slammed shut behind them. Looking for these? Reverend Crouch stood in the doorway, holding a metal lockbox. His smile was glacial. I wonder how long it would take you to try something stupid. Behind him, Sheriff Coulter stepped into view, hand resting on his holster. Lena's voice was steady. Those bonds belong to the descendants. They belong to me, Crouch corrected, just like this town does. He set the box on the desk with a thud. Sheriff? Arrest them. Coulter reached for his cuffs, just as the office phone rang. Crouch frowned. Picking it up, I said no interruptions. Whatever the voice on the other end said turned him pale. What do you mean, news vans? Through the window, Marlin saw them. 3 satellite trucks pulling into the parking lot. Cameras already rolling. Lena smiled. Anna's Bakery is next door to Channel 7. Funny how fast gossip spreads. Crouch's knuckles whitened around the phone. You little... Choice time, Reverend, Marlin said. Let's walk out with the bonds. or explain a whole city why you're arresting the people trying to return stolen property. For a long moment, the only sound was the muffled buzz of reporters in the lobby below. Then, slowly, Crouch slid the lockbox across the desk. This isn't over. Marlin took the box. Yeah, it is. As they stepped into the hall, the first camera flashes began to pop. The clock on the wall read 10:19 a.m. They'd made it with 60 seconds to spare. The hidden ledger. The lockbox weighed heavy in Marlin's hands as they pushed through the growing crowd of reporters in the New Dawn lobby. Camera flashes lit up Lena's sharp profile as she kept her head down, weaving through the chaos with practiced ease. "Keep moving," she muttered under her breath. "Don't stop. Don't talk to them." A reporter shoved a microphone in Marlin's face. "Is it true you recovered stolen Depression-era bonds from Reverend Crouch?" Lena grabbed his elbow and steered him toward the exit. No comment. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. They broke into a jog, cutting across the parking lot to where Marlin's truck was parked behind the laundromat. Only when the doors were locked and the engine roared to life did Marlin let out a shaky breath. "They're really here?" He popped the lockbox open. Inside, neatly stacked, were the bonds, every last one accounted for. Lena exhaled hard, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Holy shit, we actually did it." Marlin gripped the steering wheel, his pulse still racing. "Crouch isn't going to let this go. He'll come after us. Not if we get to the press first." Lena pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "Anna's cousin works at the Buffalo Chronicle. If we give her the story, the real story, Crouch won't be able to bury it." Marlin nodded, but something nagged at him. This feels too easy. Crouch had the bonds. He could have destroyed them. He couldn't risk it, not with reporters already outside. Maybe, Marlin frowned, or maybe he kept something back. Lena studied him. "You think there's more?" "My uncle hid those bonds for a reason, and Crouch has been desperate to get his hands on them for decades. There's got to be something else." Lena chewed her lip, then pulled out her phone again. Dr. Price. She knows more about those bonds than anyone. Dr. Price's house was just as imposing as Marlin remembered. This time, though, she opened the door before he could knock, her sharp eyes darting to the lockbox in his hands. "You got them back." "Not all of them," Marlin said. "We think Crouch kept something." Dr. Price ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. The dining table was already covered in documents, old maps, church records, a faded ledger that looked centuries old. "Show me." Marlin set the lockbox on the table. Dr. Price flipped through the bonds with gloved hands, her frown deepening with each page. "Serial numbers match the ledger," she muttered. "But something's missing." "What?" Lena leaned in. "The originals." Dr. Price tapped the ledger. "These are reissues. The real bonds, the ones signed in 1934, were never recovered after fire." Marlin and Lena exchanged a glance. "So these are copies?" "No, they're still valid. But the originals had something these don't." Dr. Price flipped to the back of the ledger, where a single page was nearly torn out. Annotations, notes in the margins. Your uncle was meticulous. If he hid them, he left a trail. Marlin's mind raced. The church is gone. If there was another hiding place. "It's Ash." Lena slumped into a chair. Dr. Price adjusted her glasses. "Not necessarily. Joseph Briggs didn't trust banks, but he didn't trust buildings either. If he had another copy of those annotations, it wouldn't be in the church. Then where?" A slow smile spread across Dr. Price's face. "Where does any old priest hide his secrets?" The Buffalo Diocesan Archives were housed in a nondescript brick building near the cathedral, its windows barred, its doors locked after hours. Lena rang the bell 3 times before a frazzled-looking archivist cracked the door open. "We're closed." Lena flashed a smile. "Sister Margaret? It's Lena Rivera. We spoke earlier." The nun's expression softened slightly. "Ah, yes. The Street Ignatius records." Her gaze flicked to Marlin. "And you must be Joseph's nephew." Marlin blinked. "You knew my uncle?" "Everyone knew Father Joseph. She stepped aside, letting them in. Come. I've pulled what I could find. The archive smelled of old paper and incense. Sister Margaret led them to a back room where a single box sat on a table, its lid coated in dust. Personal effects donated after his passing, she said. Mostly sermons, correspondence. But there's one item I thought might interest you. She lifted out a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. Marlin took it carefully. The first page bore his uncle's cramped handwriting. If you're reading this, they've found the bonds. But the real proof is elsewhere. His pulse spiked. Proof of what? Lena leaned over his shoulder as he flipped through the pages. Sermon notes, prayer lists, then near the end, a series of numbers and names. Account numbers? Lena guessed. Dr. Price snatched the journal, scanning the pages with widening eyes. Not accounts. Transactions. She stabbed a finger at an entry dated March 1936. This is a payment ledger. Crouch's father didn't just steal the bonds. He sold them. And Joseph recorded every buyer. Marlin's breath caught. So the originals are still out there. Worse. Dr. Price's voice dropped. These buyers, politicians, judges, half the city's old money families. If this gets out, it's not just Crouch who falls. It's everyone who profited. A heavy silence settled over the room. Lena was the first to speak. We can't take this to press. Why not? Marlin demanded. Because they'll kill us. She met his gaze, deadly serious. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about power. And people like that, they don't let go without a fight. Marlin looked down at the journal, his uncle's handwriting blurring before his eyes. Then we don't give them a choice. The safe deposit box was in a bank, so old its vault door looked like something out of a Western. Marlin handed over the key, the one from his uncle's envelope, the one he'd almost thrown away, and held his breath as the manager slotted it into place. The box slid out with a whisper of metal on metal. Inside was a single envelope. Marlin tore it open. A letter, dated the week before his uncle's death. Marlin, if you're reading this, you found the truth. Now do what I couldn't. Take it public. All of it. And son, be louder than the fire. Beneath the letter lay one final document, a notarized affidavit, signed by Joseph Briggs, detailing every name in the ledger, every secret, every sin. Marlin folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket. Call Anna, he told Lena. Tell her we're going live. The standoff. The newsroom of the Buffalo Chronicle was in chaos. Reporters huddled around monitors. Phones rang off the hook, and Anna's cousin, Sophia Mendez, paced behind her desk with a coffee stain on her blouse and fire in her eyes. You realize what you're handing me, right? She held up the affidavit, her fingers leaving creases in the paper. This isn't just a story. This is a bomb. Marlin leaned forward in his chair, then light the fuse. Sophia exhaled sharply. If we run this, Crouch will sue us into oblivion. He can't sue the truth, Lena countered. Not with Joseph's affidavit. Not with the ledger. Sophia glanced at the clock. 4:47 p.m. The evening broadcast went live at 6. I need to call my editor. No, Marlin stood. You call your camera crew. We do this now before Crouch knows it's coming. A beat of silence. Then Sophia grabbed her phone. The studio lights were blinding. Marlin sat stiffly on the anchor's couch, the affidavit burning a hole in his pocket. Across from him, veteran reporter Tom Reynolds adjusted his earpiece, his expression unreadable. 30 seconds. A producer called. Lena, seated beside Marlin, squeezed his wrist. Remember, we're live in 5 for... The red light on the camera blinked on. Tonight, an explosive investigation into one of Buffalo's most powerful figures. Tom began, his voice grave. Reverend Elias Crouch stands accused of not just theft, but a decades-long cover-up involving millions, and the destruction of a historic church to hide it. The screen cut to footage of St. Ignatius burning. Then the affidavit. Name after name scrolled across the screen. Local judges, council members, even a sitting congressman, all tied to the stolen bonds. All complicit. Tom turned to Marlin. You're the man who uncovered this. What's your message to Reverend Crouch tonight? Marlin looked straight into the camera. The fire didn't work. We remember. Crouch's mansion was lit up like a fortress when they arrived. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Protesters, some holding photos of ancestors lost in the St. Ignatius fire, chanted on the lawn. Sheriff Coulter's deputies formed a barricade at the gate, their faces tense. "He's not coming out," Lena muttered. Marlin checked his phone. The story was already trending. Hashtag Crouch Theft had exploded across social media. Then movement at the door. Crouch emerged, his silver hair disheveled, his usual poise shattered. Microphones were shoved in his face as he descended the steps, his lawyer shouting no comment. Over the din. For a split second, his gaze locked onto Marlin's. The hatred in his eyes was palpable. Then the crowd surged, and Crouch was shoved into a waiting black SUV, speeding away into the night. The celebration at Anna's Bakery was raucous. Descendants of the original bondholders, some clutching faded photos of grandparents they'd never met, toasted with 2 sweet pastries and strong coffee. Joe Donato clapped Marlin on the back. "To the ghost!" he laughed. Finally seen. Marlin smiled, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. Lena noticed. "He's not coming." "I know." Dr. Price had refused to join them, insisting her part was done. But Marlin suspected it was more than that. Some wounds ran too deep for celebration. Anna pressed a framed photo into his hands, a black and white image of St. Ignatius in its heyday, parishioners smiling on the steps. "For you," she said softly, "so you never forget what you gave back." Marlin swallowed hard. Then the bell above the door jingled. Every head turned as Sheriff Coulter stepped inside, his uniform hat in his hands. The room went dead silent. Coulter cleared his throat. Crouch turned himself in. Feds picked him up an hour ago. A collective inhale. "And the others?" Lena asked. "Warrants are being served as we speak." Coulter hesitated, then met Marlin's gaze. I brought you something." He pulled out a small, soot-stained box. "The original bonds. Found these in Crouch's safe. Thought you should have M." Marlin took the box, his fingers brushing the singed edges. "Why now?" Coulter shifted uncomfortably. "My granddad's name was in that ledger, too." And with that, he turned and walked out, the bell jingling softly behind him. The church was silent at midnight. Marlin stood in the ashes of St. Ignatius, the original bonds in one hand, his uncle's journal in the other. Somewhere beneath the rubble, the crypt still stood, the last piece of the building left intact. He knelt, brushing away soot until his fingers found the trapdoor's ring. This time it opened easily. One by one, he placed the bonds back where they belonged. Then he sat in the ruins and finally let himself breathe. The redemption. 1 year later, the first snowfall of December dusted the grounds of the newly rebuilt St. Ignatius Community Center. The old stone walls had been restored, the collapsed roof replaced with soaring beams of reclaimed oak. Where the altar once stood, a mural now spanned the entire back wall. A mosaic of faces, the descendants of the original bondholders, their smiles rendered in fragments of colored glass. Marlin stood on the front steps, his breath fogging in the cold air as he adjusted the ribbon across the doorway. The plaque beneath it read, "In memory of those who never stopped believing." A hand touched his elbow. Lena stood beside him, her cheeks pink from the cold, a steaming cup of coffee in her free hand. She held it out to him. Nervous? He took the cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. "Just thinking about how much has changed." And it had. The fallout from the affidavit had been swift and brutal. Reverend Crouch was serving 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. Half the city council had resigned. The recovered bonds, after months of legal battles, had been converted into a trust fund for the descendants, with enough left over to rebuild the church as something new, a home instead of a relic. Lena nodded toward the parking lot, where a line of cars was already forming. "They're early." Marlin chuckled. "Anna said she'd beat the crowd. She's catering, remember?" The doors open at noon, But by 11:30, the crowd had spilled out onto the lawn. Former parishioners, descendants, even curious locals who'd followed the story on the news, all of them bundled in coats, their voices a happy murmur in the crisp air. Anna arrived with 3 generations of Gutierrezes in tow, her arms laden with trays of pastries. Joe Donato came with his shipyard crew, their work boots leaving snowy prints on the polished floors. Even Dr. Price made an appearance, though she refused to step inside until Marlon personally escorted her over the threshold. "It's not a church anymore," she muttered, eyeing the modern interior. Good. The only empty seat was the one they'd left symbolically vacant. A single wooden chair near the mural, draped in St. Ignatius's original vestments. For the families who couldn't be there. For Joseph. At exactly noon, Marlon tapped a spoon against his coffee cup. The room quieted. "When I first came here," he began, "this place was a ruin. Just 4 walls and a lot of ghosts." He glanced at Lena, who gave him an encouraging nod. "But you all saw something else. You saw what it could be. So this isn't my victory. It's yours." A round of applause. Then Anna shouted, "Speech!" Lena rolled her eyes but stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "The original deed for St. Ignatius," she announced, "signed over to the newly formed Descendants Trust as of this morning." She held it up, "Which means officially, this place belongs to all of us now." Cheers erupted. Someone popped champagne. Marlon slipped away as the celebration swelled, stepping outside into the quiet of the courtyard. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and still. He wasn't surprised when Lena found him there 10 minutes later, 2 fresh cups of coffee in hand. "You okay?" He took the cup. "Yeah, just thinking. About what comes next." She leaned against a railing beside him, their shoulders brushing. "Well, the city still needs a janitor." He snorted. "Pretty sure I got fired for stealing a mop bucket last year. Then it's a good thing the trust needs a director." She sipped her coffee, feigning nonchalance. "Salary's decent. Benefits. And you get to keep an eye on this place." Marlon turned to stare at her. "You're serious." "I don't joke about health care plans." She met his gaze, her dark eyes warm. "You built this, Marlon. You should get to see it grow." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay." Lena grinned. "Okay. Okay." He clinked his cup against hers. "But I'm not wearing a tie." Inside, the celebration roared on, laughter and music spilling through the open doors. But out here in the quiet, something new took root. Not an ending, a beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Marlon almost missed it, buried under a stack of invoices for the community center's summer programs. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive, the return address a law firm he didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet and a check. The note was brief. For the man who returned what no one else could. Use it well. The check was for $90,000. The signature? Eleanor Price. Marlon laughed until his sides hurt. Then he framed the check and hung it in the community center's lobby, right beside the mural. A reminder of how far they'd come, and how much further they had to go. The legacy. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the St. Ignatius Community Center, casting fractured rainbows across the polished floors. Marlon stood in the center of the bustling atrium, watching as a group of teenagers set up for the weekly after-school program. Laughter echoed off the walls, mingling with the rhythmic clatter of folding chairs and the hum of conversation. A year ago, this place had been a skeleton of crumbling stone and forgotten memories. Now it pulsed with life. Lena appeared at his side, balancing a stack of flyers in one arm and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. She handed him the coffee without a word, her smirk telling him she already knew he'd forgotten to drink his own that morning. "You're staring again," she teased. "Just making sure everything's ready for the fundraiser," Marlon replied, though they both knew the truth. He wasn't just checking on the setup, he was soaking it in. The proof that every late night, every battle, every ounce of sweat had been worth it. Lena nudged him with her elbow. "It's not going to disappear if you blink, you know." Before he could respond, A familiar voice cut through the chatter. Well, if it isn't Buffalo's most infamous janitor-turned-hero. Marlon turned to see Sophia Mendez striding toward them, her press badge swinging from her neck and a cameraman in tow. "You're early," Lena noted. "And you're avoiding my emails," Sophia shot back, though her grin took the edge off. The Chronicle wanted a follow-up piece. 1 year since the scandal, the rebirth of St. Ignatius, all that feel-good stuff. She gestured to the cameraman. "Mind if we get some footage?" Marlon hesitated. He'd never quite gotten used to the attention, even after all this time. But Lena answered for him. "Knock yourself out. Just don't interrupt the kids' program." As Sophia and her cameraman wandered off, Marlon exhaled. "I still don't know how you do it. Handle all this without breaking a sweat." "Practice," Lena said simply. "And caffeine." The fundraiser was in full swing by noon. The atrium was packed with faces both familiar and new, descendants of the original bondholders, local business owners, even a few curious strangers drawn in by the buzz. Anna's bakery had outdone itself, the dessert table groaning under the weight of pastries and cakes. At the center of it all stood Dr. Price, holding court near the mural with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. When she caught Marlon's eye, she raised her glass in a silent toast. "She's proud of you, you know," Lena murmured. Marlon shook his head. "She's proud of us." A sudden hush fell over the crowd as Sophia stepped onto the small stage they'd set up near the entrance. She tapped the microphone, the feedback cutting through the chatter. If I could have everyone's attention. All eyes turned toward her. A year ago, this building was a ruin, a symbol of injustice, of secrets buried under decades of lies. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. But today, it's proof that the past doesn't have to define the future. A ripple of applause. And none of this would have been possible without two people who refused to let the truth stay buried. She gestured to Marlon and Lena. "So, what's next for the St. Ignatius Community Center?" Marlon stepped forward, his throat tight. He hadn't prepared a speech. But as he looked around at the faces watching him, people who become family, the words came easily. "This place was never just about the building," he said. "It was about the people. And as long as we remember that, there's no limit to what we can do." The applause was deafening. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Marlon found himself drawn to the mural. He traced the glass fragments with his fingertips, the cool surface smooth under his touch. Lena joined him, her shoulder brushing his. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Just thinking about how far we've come." She smiled. "And how much further we'll go." Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The future stretched before them, bright and uncharted. But for the first time in a long time, Marlon wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He was ready. If this story inspired you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that no act of courage is ever too small. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales of resilience and redemption, because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in gold. They're found in the people who fight for what's right.